I woke up that Tuesday morning to find a certified letter taped to my front door, which is never a good sign in a neighborhood governed by the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in Boulder, Colorado. The envelope was one of those official-looking ones with the return address printed in that threatening formal font that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside was a 2-page letter informing me that I was in violation of Section 17.4 of the HOA bylaws, which apparently stated that all snow removal from driveways and walkways must be performed by licensed professional snow removal services. My crime. I had been shoveling my own driveway after the snowstorm 3 days prior, and according to the letter, multiple neighbors had reported seeing me do so. The fine was $300, due within 14 days. I read the letter 3 times, standing there in my pajamas and slippers on my front porch in the freezing February air, before I finally accepted that this was real. I had lived in this neighborhood for 2 years, and the HOA had been a constant thorn in my side, but this was a new level of absurdity. The letter was signed by Karen Jensen, the HOA president, naturally. My name is Grant Morrison, and I am a 32-year-old software engineer who works from home. I bought this house because I liked the quiet neighborhood and the mountain views, not because I wanted to deal with a power-hungry HOA board telling me I could not shovel my own driveway. The irony was that I actually enjoyed the physical activity of shoveling snow. It got me away from my computer screen and gave me a workout. I went inside and immediately called the HOA office. A woman answered on the 3rd ring with a chipper voice that sounded rehearsed. Meadowbrook Hills HOA, this is Deborah speaking. How may I help you? Hi, Deborah. This is Grant Morrison from 4782 Aspen Drive. I just received a letter about a fine for shoveling my own driveway, and I think there must be some mistake. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Let me pull up your file. Oh yes, Mr. Morrison, I see the violation here. What seems to be the problem? The problem is that I should be allowed to shovel my own driveway. This is ridiculous. Sir, the bylaw is very clear. All snow removal must be performed by licensed professionals to maintain safety standards and neighborhood aesthetics. Safety standards. I have been shoveling driveways since I was 12 years old. I think I know how to safely remove snow. I understand your frustration, Mr. Morrison, but the rules apply to all residents equally. If you would like to contest the fine, you can appear before the HOA board at the next meeting, which is scheduled for next Thursday at 7 p.m. I thanked her through gritted teeth and hung up. Then I did what any reasonable person would do in this situation. I pulled up the complete HOA bylaws on my computer and started reading. I had skimmed them when I bought the house, but I had never paid much attention to the details. Now I was looking for loopholes. Section 17.4 was indeed there, buried in the middle of a chapter about property maintenance. It stated that all snow removal services on private property within the HOA boundaries must be performed by licensed and insured snow removal professionals. Residents who failed to comply would be subject to fines starting at $300 for the first offense, with increasing penalties for repeat violations. But as I read more carefully, I noticed something interesting. The bylaw did not specify what kind of license was required. It just said licensed professionals. I started researching Colorado snow removal licensing requirements, and what I found made me smile for the first time that morning. In Colorado, there is no specific state license required for snow removal services. However, you do need a business license and general liability insurance to operate as a professional snow removal company. The business license could be obtained relatively quickly through the Colorado Secretary of State website, and insurance could be secured within days if you knew where to look. An idea started forming in my mind. If the HOA wanted professional snow removal only, then I would become a professional snow removal service. I would license my own company, get insurance, and then hire myself to remove snow from my own property. Technically, I would be in full compliance with the bylaw. I spent the rest of that day researching exactly what I needed to do. I learned that I could register a business online through the Colorado Secretary of State website for a fee of about $50. The process would give me a business name and registration number that I could use to operate legally in the state. Then, I needed to get a general liability insurance policy, which would cost more but was still manageable. I also needed to check Boulder County requirements for business licenses. A quick search showed that I would need a sales tax license if I was going to charge for services, which I supposed I would have to do to make this legitimate, even if I was just paying myself. By that evening, I had a plan. I went to the Colorado Secretary of State website and filled out the application for a new business. I named it Morrison Snow Solutions LLC and listed myself as the registered agent. The address was my home address. I selected snow removal as the primary business activity and paid the filing fee with my credit card. The website said processing could take up to 5 business days, but there was an expedited option for an additional fee that would process it within 24 hours. I paid the extra money. If I was going to do this, I wanted to move fast. Next, I started calling insurance companies. This part was trickier. Most insurers wanted to schedule appointments and do assessments before writing policies. I finally found a company called Rocky Mountain Business Insurance that specialized in quick policies for small contractors. I spoke with an agent named Tom who seemed amused by my situation when I explained it. "So let me get this straight," Tom said. "Your HOA is fining you for shoveling your own driveway, and your solution is to start a licensed snow removal business so you can legally shovel your own driveway." "That is exactly right," I said. Tom laughed. "That is the most Colorado thing I have heard all week. All right, I can help you out. For a solo operation doing residential snow removal, I can write you a policy with $1 million in general liability coverage for about $1,200 annually. I will need your business registration number once it comes through, but I can get the paperwork started now." "How fast can you have the policy active?" I asked. "If I have your business registration by tomorrow afternoon, I can have your policy active by end of business Wednesday. I will email you the certificate of insurance as soon as it is processed." "Perfect," I said. "Let me give you my information." I spent the next hour on the phone with Tom, going through all the details of the insurance application. He asked about my equipment, which was just a basic snow shovel and a bag of ice melt from Home Depot. He asked about my experience, and I honestly told him I had been shoveling snow since I was a kid. He asked about the scope of services, and I said residential driveway and walkway snow removal. When we finished, Tom said he would send me the policy documents to review and sign electronically. As soon as I signed them and my business registration came through, he would activate the policy. I hung up feeling energized. This was actually going to work. I was going to beat the HOA at their own game using their own ridiculous rules. That night, I drafted a professional-looking invoice template for Morrison Snow Solutions LLC. I included fields for service date, property address, description of services, and payment amount. I found a free logo maker online and created a simple logo featuring a snowflake and a shovel. It looked surprisingly professional for something I made in 20 minutes. The next morning, I checked the Colorado Secretary of State website and found that my business registration had already been processed. Morrison Snow Solutions, LLC was now an official Colorado business entity. I had a registration number and everything. I immediately forwarded the confirmation to Tom at the insurance company. He called me back within an hour. Got your registration. I am processing your policy now. You should have your certificate of insurance by 3 p.m. You are a lifesaver, Tom, I said. Happy to help. And hey, if you ever want to expand your business beyond your own driveway, give me a call. I can adjust your coverage accordingly. I laughed. I will keep that in mind. At 2:45 p.m., my email dinged with a new message from Rocky Mountain Business Insurance. Attached was a certificate of insurance for Morrison Snow Solutions, LLC, showing $1 million in general liability coverage, effective immediately. I printed out 3 copies and put them in a folder along with my business registration confirmation. Now, I needed to make this official with the HOA. I drafted a letter on Morrison Snow Solutions letterhead, which I designed to look as professional as possible. The letter was addressed to Karen Jensen, HOA president, and it read, "Dear Miss Jensen, this letter is to inform you that the property located at 4782 Aspen Drive will be utilizing the services of Morrison Snow Solutions, LLC for all snow removal needs, effective immediately. Morrison Snow Solutions is a licensed and insured snow removal service operating in compliance with all Colorado state regulations and Meadowbrook Hills HOA bylaws. Please find attached copies of our business registration and certificate of insurance for your records. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at the number below. Sincerely, Grant Morrison, owner and operator, Morrison Snow Solutions, LLC." I printed the letter, attached copies of my business registration and insurance certificate, and put everything in an envelope. Then I drove to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the neighborhood entrance. The office was a bland single-story structure with beige siding and a small parking lot. Inside, I found Deborah sitting at a desk behind a counter. She looked up when I walked in and smiled that same rehearsed smile I had heard over the phone. "Hi there. How can I help you? I am Grant Morrison. I am here to drop off some documentation for Karen Jensen regarding my property." Deborah's smile faltered slightly when she heard my name, probably because she recognized it from the violation letter. "Oh, of course. I can make sure she gets it. Is this regarding your fine?" "In a way," I said, handing her the envelope. "I have hired a professional snow removal service for my property as required by the bylaws. This is their proof of licensing and insurance." Deborah took the envelope and opened it, scanning the contents. Her eyebrows went up as she read the letter. "Morrison Snow Solutions." "Are you related to the owner?" "I am the owner," I said cheerfully. "I started the company specifically to comply with HOA requirements. As you can see, we are fully licensed and insured according to Colorado state law." Deborah looked confused. "But you are shoveling your own driveway." "No, I am providing professional snow removal services to my property as the owner of a licensed business. There is a difference. The bylaw requires licensed professionals, and that is exactly what I am now." "I do not think that is what the bylaw meant," Deborah said slowly. "The bylaw does not specify intent. It specifies requirements, which I am now meeting. I would appreciate it if you would put those documents in my file and consider the violation resolved." Deborah looked like she wanted to argue but was not sure how. "I will need to show this to Karen. She will probably want to discuss this with you." "That is fine. I will be at the board meeting next Thursday if she wants to talk about it then. Have a good day, Deborah." I walked out feeling victorious. I knew Karen was going to lose her mind when she saw what I had done, and I was looking forward to it. I did not have to wait until Thursday. The next morning, my phone rang at 8 a.m. The caller ID showed the HOA office number. "Mr. Morrison, this is Karen Jensen from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board. I received your documentation yesterday, and I need to speak with you about this immediately." Karen's voice was tight and controlled, the kind of voice people use when they are trying very hard not to yell. I could picture her perfectly, probably in her mid-40s, blonde highlights, probably wearing a North Face jacket even indoors, definitely drinking a skinny vanilla latte. "Good morning, Karen. What can I do for you? You can explain to me what you think you are doing with this snow removal company nonsense." I am not sure what needs explaining. The HOA requires licensed professional snow removal services, so I obtained the necessary licensing and insurance to provide those services. I am now in full compliance with Section 17.4. You cannot just start a company to get around the rules, Mr. Morrison. I am not getting around anything. I am following the rules exactly as written. The bylaw requires licensed and insured professionals. I am licensed and insured. Where is the problem? The spirit of the rule is that residents should not be doing their own snow removal. It is a safety and aesthetic issue. The spirit of the rule is not enforceable, Karen. Only the actual text of the bylaw is enforceable. And the text says nothing about residents not being allowed to operate snow removal businesses. There was a long pause. I could hear Karen breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "This is not over, Mr. Morrison. I am going to bring this to the full board, and we are going to revisit the bylaw if necessary. You are certainly welcome to do that. In the meantime, I expect the fine to be waived since I am now in compliance. We will see about that at the meeting next Thursday, 7 p.m. I expect you to be there." She hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down and smiled. This was going even better than I had hoped. Over the next few days, I received several more calls from HOA board members. First was Patricia, the vice president, who tried a softer approach than Karen. She explained that the board was just trying to maintain standards in the neighborhood and keep everyone safe. I politely told her I understood, but that I was in compliance with the rules and expected the fine to be dropped. Then I got a call from Richard, the treasurer, who took a more aggressive stance. He informed me that the board had consulted with their attorney and that they believed my company was a sham created solely to circumvent HOA regulations. I informed Richard that Morrison Snow Solutions was a legitimate registered business in the state of Colorado, fully insured and operating legally, and that if the HOA wanted to claim otherwise, they were welcome to do so in court. Richard backpedaled quickly after that. Nobody wanted to actually go to court over this, least of all the HOA, whose legal expenses came from homeowner dues. By the time Thursday rolled around, I was feeling confident. I printed out additional copies of all my business documentation, put on a button-down shirt and slacks, and drove to the community center where board meetings were held. The community center was a larger building than the HOA office, with a multipurpose room that could hold about 50 people. When I arrived at 6:45, there were already a dozen residents there, sitting in folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table at the front where the board members sat. Karen was already seated at the center of the table, with Patricia to her left and Richard to her right. Two other board members I did not recognize sat at the ends. Karen was exactly as I had pictured her. Mid-40s, highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a puffy vest over a turtleneck, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She saw me walk in and her expression hardened. I took a seat in the third row and waited. At 7 p.m. sharp, Karen called the meeting to order by banging a small gavel on the table. They went through the usual opening procedures, reading the minutes from the last meeting, going over the financial report, discussing some landscaping issues for the common areas. I listened with half an ear, waiting for my name to come up. Finally, after about 30 minutes of mundane HOA business, Karen cleared her throat and looked directly at me. Item 7 on tonight's agenda is a violation appeal from Grant Morrison of 4782 Aspen Drive. Mr. Morrison, would you like to come forward and address the board? I stood up and walked to the front of the room. Thank you, Karen. As you know, I received a violation notice for shoveling my own driveway, which the HOA claimed violated Section 17.4 requiring professional snow removal services. I have since established Morrison Snow Solutions LLC, a licensed and insured snow removal company, and I am now providing professional services to my property in full compliance with the bylaw. I am requesting that the fine be waived. Mr. Morrison, Karen said in that patronizing tone people use when they think they have you cornered, the board has reviewed your documents, and while we acknowledge that you have created a business entity, we do not believe this is sufficient to meet the requirements of the bylaw. The purpose of Section 17.4 is to ensure that snow removal is performed by experienced professionals with proper equipment and training, not by homeowners with shovels. With all due respect, Karen, that is not what the bylaw says. The bylaw requires licensed and insured professionals. It says nothing about experience levels, equipment standards, or whether the professional can be a homeowner. I meet every requirement as written. Richard leaned forward. Our attorney has advised us that your company appears to be a shell corporation created solely to avoid compliance with HOA regulations. That constitutes fraud. I pulled out my folder and held it up. Your attorney is wrong, and I would be happy to prove it in court if necessary. Morrison Snow Solutions is a legitimate business registered with the Colorado Secretary of State and insured through a reputable insurance company. I am operating legally under Colorado law. If the HOA wants to claim fraud, you will need to demonstrate that I am not actually providing snow removal services, which you cannot do because I am providing those services. To my own property, yes, but that is not illegal or fraudulent. What about other clients? Patricia asked. Does your company have any other clients besides yourself? Not yet, I admitted, but the bylaw does not require a minimum number of clients. It just requires that the service be provided by a licensed professional. Karen's face was turning red. This is absurd. You know perfectly well that the intent of the rule is to prevent homeowners from doing substandard snow removal that makes the neighborhood look bad. Then the rule should say that, I said. But it does not. It simply requires licensed professionals, which is what I am. Look, I did not ask for this fight. I was perfectly happy shoveling my own driveway. You are the ones who sent me a $300 fine for doing basic property maintenance. So I found a legal way to comply with your requirement while still maintaining my own property. That is not fraud. That is following the rules. The board can amend the bylaws, Karen said coldly. Yes, you can. But amendments have to be approved by a vote of the homeowners, which requires proper notice and a quorum. That process takes months. In the meantime, I am in compliance with the current bylaw, and the fine should be waived. The board members conferred among themselves in whispers for a few minutes. I could see that most of the other residents in the room were watching with interest. A few were smiling, clearly enjoying watching someone stand up to the board. Finally, Karen looked back at me. The board is going to table this issue until we can get a formal legal opinion from our attorney. Your fine is not waived at this time, Mr. Morrison. We will notify you of our decision. That is fine, I said. But just so we are clear, I will not be paying the fine unless you can show me specifically how I am in violation of the bylaw as written. And if you try to collect on a fine that is not legally valid, I will be happy to challenge it in court. Karen's jaw clenched. This meeting is adjourned. She banged the gavel and I walked out. Several residents stopped me on my way to the parking lot to shake my hand and congratulate me for standing up to the board. One elderly man named Frank told me that Karen had been making everyone's lives miserable for years with increasingly ridiculous rules, and he was glad someone was finally pushing back. I drove home feeling good, but knowing that this was far from over. Karen struck me as the type who did not let things go easily. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more letters from the HOA. The first was a follow-up demanding payment of the fine. The second was a notice that the board had hired an attorney to review my business documents. The third was a new violation notice claiming that Morrison Snow Solutions was operating a business out of a residential property without proper zoning approval. That last one actually had me worried for a minute, until I researched Boulder County zoning laws and discovered that home-based businesses were allowed in residential zones as long as they did not generate significant traffic, noise, or require customers to visit the residence. Since I was not having customers come to my house, I was fine. I sent a detailed response to the HOA explaining this, along with copies of the relevant zoning ordinances. Then I got creative. If the HOA was going to keep harassing me, I was going to make Morrison Snow Solutions as official and professional as possible. I created a website for the company using a cheap hosting service and a template designed for contractors. The site had pages describing our services, our commitment to quality, our insurance coverage, and our service area. I included a contact form and a phone number that went to a Google Voice number I set up specifically for the business. I also ordered business cards and door hangers. The door hangers advertised snow removal services for reasonable rates and listed my phone number. I did not actually expect to get customers from them, but they made Morrison Snow Solutions look more legitimate. The real surprise came when I actually got a call on the business line. It was a Thursday afternoon, about 3 weeks after I had started the company. A woman named Linda called saying she lived 2 streets over from me and had heard about my snow removal service from a neighbor. Her regular service had just canceled on her, and she needed her driveway cleared before the weekend when her daughter was coming to visit. Could I help? I was so surprised I almost said no, but then I realized this was perfect. If I had actual paying customers besides myself, the HOA would have an even harder time claiming my business was fraudulent. Absolutely, I told Linda. What is your address? She lived at 3890 Birch Lane, just a 5-minute drive from my house. I told her I could come by that afternoon to give her an estimate. She sounded relieved. I drove over to Linda's house and found a friendly woman in her 60s waiting for me on her front porch. Her driveway was about the same size as mine and had about 4 inches of snow from the previous night's storm that needed clearing. "Thank you so much for coming on short notice," Linda said. "My regular service just called this morning to say they are shutting down. The owner retired apparently." "No problem at all," I said. "For a driveway this size, I can have it cleared in about 30 minutes. My rate is $40 for a standard clearing." "That sounds perfect. Can you do it now?" "Sure thing." I went back to my truck and got my shovel. "Yes, I was still just using a regular snow shovel, but it got the job done. I spent the next 35 minutes clearing Linda's driveway and walkway, piling the snow neatly on the sides. When I finished, I pulled out my phone and wrote up an invoice using the template I had created, then sent it to Linda's email. She paid me via Venmo on the spot and asked if I would be interested in a seasonal contract for the rest of the winter. We agreed that I would clear her driveway after any snowfall over 2 inches for the same rate, and she would pay me monthly. I drove home with a legitimate customer and $40 earned by my snow removal business. Morrison Snow Solutions was no longer just a paper company created to annoy the HOA. It was actually functioning as a real business. Over the next few weeks, I got 3 more clients the same way. Word of mouth was apparently strong in Meadowbrook Hills, especially among people who were fed up with the limited options for snow removal services. The big commercial companies charged a lot and often did not prioritize residential driveways. I was local, fast, and cheap. By mid-March, I had 7 regular clients plus my own house. I was making a decent side income from Morrison Snow Solutions, and I was actually enjoying the work. It got me out of the house, gave me exercise, and I met some nice neighbors. The HOA, meanwhile, had gone quiet. I had not received any new violation notices in over a month. I assumed they had finally accepted that I was in compliance with their bylaw, or their attorney had told them they did not have a case. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble came on a Friday morning in late March when I checked my mail and found an official-looking envelope from a law firm called Morrison and Associates. Inside was a letter informing me that the Meadowbrook Hills HOA was filing a formal complaint against me for operating a commercial business in violation of HOA covenants. I read the letter twice, my stomach sinking. This was different from the previous letters. This was from an actual law firm, and they were claiming I was violating different rules now. Not the snow removal bylaw, but covenants about commercial activities. The letter cited Section 4.2 of the HOA covenants, which prohibited residents from conducting commercial business activities on their property. They claimed that by operating Morrison Snow Solutions from my home address and storing equipment on my property, I was in violation of this covenant. The fine was $500, and if I did not cease business operations immediately, the HOA would seek legal action to force compliance. I immediately pulled up the complete HOA covenants and found Section 4.2. It was indeed there, and it was worded more broadly than I had realized. It prohibited the use of residential properties for commercial purposes, including but not limited to retail sales, professional services, manufacturing, and storage of commercial equipment or vehicles. The problem was that this was clearly aimed at preventing people from turning their houses into stores or warehouses, not at home-based businesses like mine. But the language was vague enough that the HOA could try to argue that it applied. I needed a lawyer. I spent that afternoon researching attorneys in Boulder who specialized in HOA disputes and contract law. I found a firm called Mountain Legal Group that had good reviews and experience with HOA cases. I called and explained my situation to a paralegal who took notes and said an attorney would call me back. The attorney, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, called me 2 hours later. I explained everything from the beginning. The original snow removal violation, my decision to start a licensed business, the subsequent harassment from the HOA, and now this latest complaint about commercial activity. Sarah listened carefully and asked detailed questions about the bylaws, my business operations, and my interactions with the HOA. When I finished, She was quiet for a moment before responding. "Okay, here is what I think. The HOA is on shaky ground with this commercial activity claim. Colorado law generally protects home-based businesses as long as they meet certain criteria, which yours does. You are not having customers come to your residence. You are not creating noise or traffic issues, and you are not using your home as a retail location. The fact that your business is registered to your home address is completely normal and legal." "So they cannot fine me for this?" I asked. "They can try, but I do not think it will hold up if challenged. However, the bigger issue is that the HOA clearly has it out for you at this point. Even if you beat this complaint, they will likely keep finding new ways to harass you. Have you considered trying to negotiate a resolution?" "What kind of resolution?" "Well, the original issue was about snow removal standards, right? Maybe there is a compromise where the HOA amends their bylaw to allow homeowners to do their own snow removal under certain conditions, and in exchange, you agree to stop poking the bear." I thought about it. The idea of giving in to Karen and her cronies bothered me on principle, but Sarah had a point. This was taking up a lot of my time and energy, and legal fees would add up quickly if this turned into a prolonged fight. "Let me think about it," I said. "In the meantime, what should I do about this letter?" "Send a response through me. I will draft something that explains your position and pushes back on their interpretation of the covenant. That will buy us some time to figure out the next steps. I will need you to sign a retainer agreement and pay a deposit for my services." We discussed her fees, which were reasonable, and I agreed to move forward. Sarah said she would have a draft response to me by Monday for my review. That weekend, I did not sleep much. I kept thinking about the whole situation and how ridiculous it had become. All I had wanted was to shovel my own driveway. Now I was in a legal dispute with my HOA, running an actual snow removal business and paying attorney fees. It would have been funny if it was not so frustrating. On Monday, Sarah sent me her draft response. It was professional and firm, explaining that Morrison Snow Solutions was a legitimate business operating in full compliance with Colorado law and Boulder County regulations. It argued that Section 4.2 of the HOA covenants did not apply to home-based businesses that did not impact the residential character of the neighborhood. It requested that the HOA withdraw the complaint and the associated fine. I approved the letter, and Sarah sent it to Harrison and Associates that afternoon. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days later, Sarah called me. I heard back from the HOA's attorney. They are not backing down on the complaint, but they indicated they might be willing to discuss a resolution. They suggested a mediation session where both sides could try to work out an agreement. "Do you think that is a good idea?" I asked. "It could be. Mediation is less expensive than litigation, and if you can reach an agreement, it ends the dispute. The downside is that you would likely have to make some compromises, but I think it is worth trying before this escalates further." "All right, let us do it." Sarah arranged the mediation session for the following week. It would be held at a neutral location, a conference room at a business center in Boulder, with a professional mediator facilitating the discussion. The HOA would be represented by Karen and one other board member, along with their attorney. I would be there with Sarah. The day of the mediation, I put on my most professional outfit, a suit and tie that I normally only wore to weddings and funerals. Sarah met me in the parking lot of the business center, and we went over our strategy one more time before going inside. The conference room was bland and corporate, with a large oval table, uncomfortable chairs, and motivational posters on the walls. Karen was already there with Patricia, the vice president, and their attorney, a stern-looking man in his 50s named Gregory Harrison. The mediator was a woman named Jennifer who had a calm, professional demeanor. We all sat down, and Jennifer explained how the mediation would work. Each side would have a chance to present their perspective, and then we would work together to try to find common ground and reach an agreement. Everything discussed in mediation was confidential and could not be used in court if we failed to reach an agreement. Gregory went first, laying out the HOA's position. He claimed that Morrison Snow Solutions was a sham business created solely to circumvent HOA rules, that my operation of the business from my home violated the covenants, and that my confrontational attitude toward the board had created a hostile environment in the neighborhood. I wanted to laugh at that last part. Hostile environment. They were the ones who had fined me for shoveling my driveway. Sarah responded calmly, explaining that Morrison Snow Solutions was a legitimate business providing actual services to paying customers. She detailed my licensing, insurance, and compliance with all applicable laws. She argued that the HOA's interpretation of their covenants was overly broad, and that trying to prohibit a home-based business like mine would likely violate Colorado law protecting home occupations. Then it was my turn to speak. Jennifer asked me to explain my perspective on the situation. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, "I did not want any of this. I just wanted to shovel my own driveway, which is a completely normal thing for a homeowner to do. When the HOA sent me a fine for that, I was frustrated, so I found a legal way to comply with the rule while still being able to do my own snow removal. Yes, I started a business, but it turned out to be a good business. I have real clients now. I am providing a service people want." "But you must see how this looks from the board's perspective," Gregory said. "You created the business purely to get around the rules." "I created the business to comply with the rules," I corrected him. "There is a difference. And honestly, if the rule had not existed in the first place, none of this would have happened. The problem is not Morrison Snow Solutions. The problem is an HOA that is micromanaging homeowners to an absurd degree." Karen's face flushed red. "We are trying to maintain standards in this neighborhood. That is our job as the board. Your job is to manage the common areas and enforce reasonable rules," I said. "Telling people they cannot shovel their own driveways is not reasonable. It is controlling." Jennifer intervened before the discussion could get more heated. "Let us focus on finding a solution. Mr. Morrison, what would you like to see happen here?" "I would like the HOA to drop all fines against me, acknowledge that Morrison Snow Solutions is operating legally, and ideally amend Section 17.4 to allow homeowners to do their own snow removal if they choose. In exchange, I will commit to maintaining my property to high standards and not causing any issues in the neighborhood." "And what about your business?" Patricia asked. "Will you continue operating it?" "Yes," I said. "I have customers who are counting on me. I am not going to shut down a legitimate business just because the HOA does not like it." Karen shook her head. "That is not acceptable. We cannot have residents running businesses out of their homes. It sets a bad precedent." "Karen," Sarah said gently, "with all due respect, many residents in Meadowbrook Hills probably work from home. The only difference is that Grant's business involves occasionally storing a shovel in his garage. You are making a much bigger issue out of this than it needs to be." Gregory leaned back in his chair. "What if we amended the commercial activity covenant to explicitly allow home-based businesses that meet certain criteria? We could define standards for things like traffic, noise, and visible impact on the neighborhood. As long as Mr. Morrison's business meets those standards, he would be allowed to continue operating." That actually sounded reasonable. Sarah and I exchanged glances. I would be open to that, I said. Karen still looked unhappy, but Patricia nodded thoughtfully. That could work. We would need to draft specific criteria and get approval from the full board, but it seems like a fair compromise. Jennifer guided us through the details over the next hour. We agreed on language that would allow home-based businesses as long as they did not create noise, traffic, or visual disruptions to the neighborhood. We also agreed that Section 17.4 would be amended to allow homeowners to do their own snow removal as long as it was completed within 24 hours of a snowfall ending, and done to reasonable standards. In exchange, I agreed to drop any potential legal claims against the HOA, and the HOA agreed to waive all fines against me. We also agreed that if any future disputes arose, we would attempt mediation before pursuing legal action. By the end of the session, we had a written agreement that everyone signed. It was not perfect, but it was a resolution that I could live with. As we were leaving, Karen approached me in the parking lot. I expected another confrontation, but her expression was different than usual. She looked tired. "Mr. Morrison, I want you to know that I was not trying to make your life difficult. I genuinely believe that maintaining standards is important for property values and community quality of life." I softened a bit. "I understand that, Karen. But sometimes standards can go too far and start feeling like control instead of community improvement. People should have some autonomy over their own property." She nodded slowly. "Maybe you are right. This has all gotten out of hand. I am sorry it went this far." I was surprised by the apology. "I appreciate that. And for what it is worth, I think the compromise we reached today is good for everyone." We shook hands, and I drove home feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It had been an exhausting few months, but I had successfully fought back against an unreasonable HOA rule and ended up with a successful side business in the process. The following weeks were busy. The HOA board held a special meeting to approve the covenant amendments we had agreed to in mediation. Sarah attended with me to make sure everything was done properly. The amendments passed with only one dissenting vote from Richard, who apparently still thought I was some kind of troublemaker. Once the amendments were official, I received a letter from the HOA formally closing all violation complaints against me and confirming that all fines had been waived. I framed that letter and hung it in my home office as a reminder that sometimes fighting back against bureaucratic nonsense actually works. Morrison Snow Solutions continued to grow. By the end of the winter season, I had 12 regular clients and was making about $800 a month in side income. It was not enough to quit my day job, but it was a nice supplement, and I genuinely enjoyed the work. When spring arrived and the snow finally stopped, several of my clients asked if I offered other services like lawn mowing or leaf removal. I had not originally planned to expand Morrison Snow Solutions beyond snow removal, but I realized there was demand for it. I did some research and found that I could easily expand my services without needing additional licensing, just the same general liability insurance I already had. I bought a used lawn mower from Craigslist and started offering lawn care services. Then I added gutter cleaning and leaf removal in the fall. Morrison Snow Solutions became Morrison Property Services, offering year-round maintenance for residential properties. By the end of that first year, I had 20 regular clients and was making over $1,500 a month. The best part was that I genuinely enjoyed running the business. It got me out of my apartment, gave me exercise, and let me build relationships with my neighbors. It was satisfying to see a tangible result of my work at the end of each job. which was different from my software engineering work, where results were often intangible. I also found satisfaction in the fact that I had turned the HOA's ridiculous rule into a successful business opportunity. What had started as a spiteful workaround to avoid a $300 fine had become a legitimate source of income and personal fulfillment. About a year after the whole dispute began, I ran into Frank, the elderly man who had congratulated me for standing up to the HOA after that board meeting. He was out walking his dog when I was clearing leaves from a client's yard. "Grant, good to see you, son. I heard your business is doing well." "It is, Frank. Thanks. How have things been with the HOA?" Frank chuckled. "Much better, actually. After your whole situation, Karen seems to have backed off on some of the more ridiculous enforcement. I think she realized she was pushing too hard. We have not had any crazy violation notices in months." "That is good to hear. You did the neighborhood a favor by standing up to her. Sometimes these HOA boards forget they are supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. You reminded them of that." I smiled. "I just did not want to pay $300 for shoveling my own driveway." "Well, however it started, you made a difference. Keep up the good work with your business. My neighbor Linda speaks very highly of you." I continued building Morrison Property Services over the next year. I invested in better equipment: a professional-grade lawn mower, a leaf blower, a pressure washer for cleaning driveways in the summer. I raised my rates slightly as I got more experienced and efficient. I even hired a high school student named Tyler to help me during the summer months when the lawn care work was too much for me to handle alone. By the end of the second year, Morrison Property Services had 40 regular clients and was generating about $3,000 a month in revenue. After expenses and Tyler's wages, I was netting around $2,000 a month, which was enough that I started thinking about whether I wanted to keep doing software engineering or focus on the property services business full-time. I decided to keep both for now. The software job provided stability and benefits, while the property services business provided variety and extra income. Together, they gave me a good quality of life. The HOA continued to operate much more reasonably after our mediation agreement. Karen actually became somewhat friendly toward me. We would occasionally chat if we ran into each other at neighborhood events. She even recommended Morrison Property Services to a friend of hers who lived in a different HOA. I learned through neighborhood gossip that there had been some tension on the HOA board after my dispute. Apparently, several board members had been uncomfortable with how aggressively Karen had pursued the violations against me, and there had been discussions about whether she should continue as president. She had apparently toned down her enforcement approach as a result, which made everyone's lives easier. The covenant amendments we had negotiated also opened the door for other residents to operate home-based businesses. A woman 3 streets over started a dog grooming business that she ran out of a converted garage. A retired accountant began doing tax preparation from his home office. The neighborhood became more flexible and accommodating, which I think actually strengthened the community rather than harming it. I also became more involved in HOA affairs. I started attending board meetings regularly, not to cause trouble, but to stay informed and make sure the board was operating reasonably. I even considered running for a board position when elections came around, though I ultimately decided I did not have the time for it with my 2 jobs. One of the interesting, unexpected consequences of my whole experience was that other people in different HOAs started reaching out to me for advice. Apparently, word had spread through local community forums about how I had successfully fought back against an unreasonable HOA rule. People would email or call asking how I had started my business. what legal strategies I had used, and how I had navigated the dispute. I started documenting my experience in a blog post on the Morrison Property Services website. I laid out exactly what I had done, step by step, from registering the business to getting insurance to negotiating with the HOA. I included copies of the letters I had sent and advice on how to research bylaws and covenants. The blog post went viral in local HOA reform circles, and I received dozens of thank you messages from people who used my strategies to fight their own unreasonable HOA rules. Some people successfully started their own businesses like I had. Others used my documentation to challenge HOA rules in mediation or court. A few even managed to get their HOAs to completely repeal unreasonable bylaws. I felt like I had accidentally become a small part of a larger movement pushing back against HOA overreach. 3 years after the whole thing started, I attended the HOA annual meeting where they were electing new board members. Karen had decided not to run for re-election as president, citing work commitments, though I suspected she was just tired of the job. Patricia was running for president, and several new candidates were running for the other board positions. During the open forum portion of the meeting, an older gentleman named Paul stood up to speak. He had lived in Meadowbrook Hills for 15 years and had been on the board previously. "I just want to say something about the direction of this HOA over the past few years," Paul said. "When I was on the board, we focused on the basics, maintaining common areas, ensuring homes were kept in reasonable condition, and fostering community. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that and started micromanaging every little thing. The situation with Grant Morrison and the snow removal rule was a wake-up call. It showed us that we had gone too far. I am grateful that we were able to resolve that dispute and amend our rules to be more reasonable. I hope the next board continues that trend toward less overreach and more common sense." Several people applauded, including me. It was validating to hear someone acknowledge that the whole dispute had been about a broader issue than just my specific situation. Patricia was elected president, and a slate of more moderate board members was elected to the other positions. At their first meeting, the new board announced they would be conducting a comprehensive review of all HOA bylaws and covenants to identify other rules that might be overly restrictive or outdated. They invited homeowner input on which rules should be revised or eliminated. I submitted several suggestions, including relaxing restrictions on fence heights, eliminating rules about what types of flowers could be planted in front yards, and allowing basketball hoops in driveways. Most of my suggestions were adopted in a revised set of bylaws that was approved by homeowner vote the following year. Meadowbrook Hills became a genuinely nicer place to live, as the HOA backed off from aggressive enforcement and focused on things that actually mattered. Property values remained stable, the neighborhood looked good, and people felt like they had reasonable autonomy over their own homes. It turned out that you could maintain community standards without being oppressive about it. Morrison Property Services continued to thrive. By year 4, I had 60 clients and was generating enough revenue that I decided to transition to running the business full-time. I gave notice at my software engineering job and dove into property services completely. It was a risk, but the business had proven stable enough that I felt confident making the leap. I expanded my services further, adding pressure washing, gutter cleaning, deck staining, and minor repairs. I hired 2 more employees to help handle the workload. I bought a work van and had it professionally wrapped with the Morrison Property Services logo. I invested in marketing, including a Google Ads campaign and door hangers throughout Boulder County. Within 2 years of going full-time, Morrison Property Services had 150 clients and 3 employees. I was making more money than I had as a software engineer, and I was happier. The work was physically demanding, but it was also rewarding in ways my desk job had never been. I also started doing some commercial properties in addition to residential work. I landed a contract to maintain the landscaping at a small office park, which provided steady monthly income. Then I got contracts with 2 retail shopping centers and a church. Morrison Property Services became known as a reliable, affordable option for property maintenance in Boulder. Looking back on the whole experience, I sometimes marveled at how a single absurd HOA rule had changed the entire trajectory of my life. If Karen had not sent me that violation notice for shoveling my own driveway, I would probably still be sitting in front of a computer all day writing code. Instead, I was running a successful business, working outside, employing people, and serving my community in a tangible way. The whole experience also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. It would have been easier to just pay the $300 fine and hire a snow removal service like the HOA wanted. But that would have meant accepting an unreasonable rule and letting the HOA continue its overreach unchallenged. By fighting back, I not only solved my own problem but also helped make things better for everyone in the neighborhood. I also learned that sometimes creative solutions are better than direct confrontation. Rather than just arguing with the HOA about why their rule was stupid, I found a way to comply with the rule while still achieving my goal. That creative approach not only resolved my immediate problem, but also created a business opportunity I had never anticipated. 5 years after the initial dispute, I was invited to speak at a community forum about HOA reform. The forum was organized by a local advocacy group that was pushing for state legislation to limit HOA powers and provide more protections for homeowners. About 50 people attended, including several state legislators who were considering sponsoring reform bills. I told my story from beginning to end, explaining how a $300 fine for shoveling snow had led to a successful business and changes in my HOA's approach to enforcement. I talked about the importance of reading bylaws carefully, documenting everything, and being willing to stand up to unreasonable rules. I also emphasized the value of negotiation and compromise, explaining how the mediation session had led to a better outcome than litigation would have. After my presentation, several people came up to thank me for sharing my experience. One woman told me she was in a similar dispute with her HOA over a rule prohibiting vegetable gardens in front yards. A man described being fined for parking his work truck in his driveway overnight. Another person was fighting a rule that required all exterior paint colors to be approved by the HOA, even for touch-ups. I gave them all the same advice. Read the rules carefully, document everything, look for creative solutions, and do not be afraid to push back if the HOA is clearly overreaching. I also shared Sarah's contact information, since she had been so helpful in my case. Several months later, I was contacted by a journalist from a Denver newspaper who was writing a series of articles about HOA abuses. She had heard about my story and wanted to interview me. I agreed, and the article ran as part of a 5-part series about HOA overreach in Colorado. My story was featured prominently, along with photos of me working on a client's property and quotes about how I had turned an HOA violation into a business opportunity. The article generated a lot of attention. I received dozens of emails from people around the country who were dealing with similar HOA issues. Some asked for advice, Others just wanted to share their own horror stories. A few people even asked if I could come start Morrison Property Services branches in their states, though that was not something I was interested in pursuing. The publicity also brought in more business. Several new clients found me through the article, and I had to hire another employee to keep up with demand. Morrison Property Services was becoming a significant local brand in the Boulder area. By year 7 of the business, I had 200 clients, 6 employees, and was generating $500,000 in annual revenue. I had moved from being a solo operator with a shovel to running a legitimate property services company with professional equipment, a fleet of vehicles, and a growing reputation. I opened a small office in a commercial complex rather than running everything from my home, which made operations easier and more professional. I hired an office manager named Rachel to handle scheduling, billing, and customer service so I could focus on operations and growth. I invested in professional software for managing jobs, tracking employee time, and handling invoices. Morrison Property Services had become a real company, far beyond what I had ever imagined when I first registered the business out of spite toward my HOA. The HOA, meanwhile, had continued its evolution toward being more reasonable and community-focused. Patricia served 2 successful terms as president before stepping down, and the board position was taken over by a younger resident named James who worked in nonprofit management. Under his leadership, the HOA started focusing more on community events and amenities rather than enforcement and violations. They organized neighborhood block parties, movie nights in the park, and volunteer days to maintain common areas. They installed new playground equipment and improved the walking trails. The HOA transformed from being an adversarial force in people's lives to being an actual positive presence in the community. I often thought about how different things might have been if I had just paid that original $300 fine and moved on with my life. I would have saved myself a lot of stress and conflict in the short term. But I also would have missed out on building a business I loved, helping reform an oppressive HOA, and connecting with my community in meaningful ways. The experience taught me that sometimes the difficult path is the right path, and that standing up for principle can lead to outcomes better than you ever expected. It also taught me that creative problem solving often beats head-on confrontation, and that building something positive is better than just tearing down something negative. 8 years after receiving that first violation notice, I attended the Meadowbrook Hills HOA annual meeting once again. This time, though, I was not there to fight a violation. I was there because the HOA was presenting me with their Community Service Award for my work maintaining properties throughout the neighborhood, and for my role in helping reform the HOA's approach to governance. Karen, who was still living in the neighborhood though no longer on the board, was the one who presented the award. She gave a speech about how our initial conflict had led to positive changes for everyone, and how she had learned from the experience about the importance of balancing standards with individual freedom. When Grant Morrison started shoveling his driveway 8 years ago, I saw it as a violation of our community rules, Karen said. But Grant saw it as a fundamental right to maintain his own property. In the conflict that followed, we both learned important lessons. I learned that rules need to be reasonable and serve the community, not control it. And I think Grant learned that sometimes working with people, even when they disagree with you, can lead to better outcomes than just fighting. Today, Grant's business serves dozens of homes in this neighborhood. His approach helped reform our HOA bylaws, and he has become a valued member of our community. This award is a small token of our appreciation. I accepted the award, which was a nice plaque with my name engraved on it, and gave a brief speech thanking the community for supporting my business and for being willing to change when change was needed. As I sat back down, I reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought me to that moment. From a simple act of shoveling snow to a thriving business to an HOA award, the path had been unpredictable and sometimes difficult, but ultimately rewarding. Morrison Property Services continued to grow and evolve. By year 10, we had expanded beyond Boulder to serve clients in several surrounding communities. We had 10 employees, multiple work vehicles, and a reputation as one of the best property maintenance companies in the region. Annual revenue had grown to over $1 million, and I was employing people, serving my community, and building something I was proud of. I never forgot where it all started, though. I kept that first violation notice framed in my office, right next to the Community Service Award. It served as a reminder of why I started the business, and why it was important to stand up for what you believe in, even when it seems easier to just go along with unreasonable rules. The snow shovel I had used for that very first job at Linda's house was still hanging in my garage, even though the company had long since upgraded to professional snow blowers and other equipment. Sometimes I would look at it and smile, thinking about how something as simple as a shovel and the determination to use it had changed everything. Looking at my life now compared to 8 years ago, I could not help but feel grateful for that ridiculous HOA rule. It had pushed me out of my comfort zone, forced me to be creative and persistent, and ultimately led me to a career and lifestyle that I found far more fulfilling than my previous path. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected challenges. The story of how Morrison Property Services became something of a legend in local HOA reform circles. People would reference it as an example of how creative resistance to unreasonable rules could lead to positive change. I occasionally got calls from reporters or researchers studying HOA governance who wanted to hear the full story. I always told them the same thing. It started with a shovel, a stubborn refusal to accept an unjust fine, and a willingness to think outside the box. The fact that it grew into something much larger was almost accidental, but it proved that one person standing up to institutional overreach really could make a difference. As I looked toward the future of Morrison Property Services, I had plans to keep expanding services and potentially franchise the business model to other regions. But no matter how big the company grew, I would never forget the fundamental principle that started it all. People should have the freedom to maintain their own properties without unreasonable interference, and sometimes fighting for that freedom leads to opportunities you never expected. The whole experience had transformed my life in ways I never could have predicted when I woke up that Tuesday morning 8 years ago to find a violation notice taped to my door. From software engineer to business owner, from HOA adversary to community award recipient, from a man with a shovel to the head of $1 million company, the journey had been remarkable. And it all started because someone told me I was not allowed to shovel my own driveway.